And go.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad to be back with everybody here and all of our listeners. What I'm going to do is just introduce the topic, and then Lori's going to talk a little bit about the kind of dialogue we're exploring, and then we'll dive right into it. So our exploration tonight is looking at the return. So this is the move from autumn into winter, kidney 7, returning current. There's a lot of different ways that we can explore this. One is from the evolutionary perspective, where autumn can represent this culmination point, this sort of full completion of a structure. But then at the same time, there begins to be a dissolution that starts to occur. And in that dissolution process, we fall from this place of completion into a dissolving where we return to a place where we don't exactly know where we are. But from an evolutionary view, it's not just a circle. It's sort of like the fruits that occur at the end of the season. They fall to the ground and they carry their history with them. And so then there's this exploration of what does it mean to fall back into a place where we don't know where we are, but somehow we have the memory of where we've come from. And there's sort of the possibility for a new emergence, but we're not quite at the emergence phase yet. So this is one aspect of the return. But another aspect of the return is when we fall off the wheel altogether. And again, it's this kind of process where we have this moment of completion where we feel like we know who we are. But then all of that dissolves in such a way that we fall out of the wheel back to our sort of root nature. And this is the cultivation of wisdom. One of the characters for wisdom is um, the heart, and then above the heart, there's a hand, and then above that, there's branches like a broom. So you're like sweeping away the obscurations in the heart until all that's left is the deep root nature. So these are sort of two different aspects. One is going back to origin, and one is fruiting, giving birth to the seeds to the next phase of the evolutionary cycle. And I think I'll just leave it. I'll leave it there, and then we can just see where we want to go with all of that.
Thanks, Alexander. It's beautiful, and I love just the invitation to return to that place where we don't know where we are. And I have to say, this really is one of my, and there's so many points, but this is one of my most beloved points for what it brings. And in speaking about dialogue, I feel like, in a way, this would be one of the points of dialogue. It's bringing us to the place where we don't know where we are, but to do that with intention. And I feel that dialogue is an opportunity to go to return to before we lived in binaries or opposites or separateness, but to return to before that, into that place of union and at the same time separation, to go into that place as a kind of group meditation or experiment where we don't know what's coming and we don't even know what we want to bring. And in thinking about this mode of being together that we've been engaging in over, I think it's 2 years now,
Wow.
that there's it grows in its preciousness, it grows in its potency. And yet I always come to these gatherings with no idea what's going to emerge. And that's such an exciting thing right now. I mean, for me, actually, to just speak completely from my heart, this is the place where I find hope. And it's so precious to me that we get to share this in an ongoing way, not just once, but that we keep coming back together and informing and devoting ourselves to what is emergent. And we don't even know what it is. When we started, we're like, we don't even know. And so that's mostly what I want to say about the meta intention. It's almost like to come together without intention and yet a very clear devotion to a way of being together that's not like anything else that's really happening out there. Um, and again, that this for me is the place where we access the unknown, where we open to the possible, and where we actually are co-creating a conduit to something completely new, some very different new way of being together. So let's go.
Well, I think that new way of being and the presence of hope, as you mentioned, what arises in me is that the turning point is death and rebirth simultaneously. So it's the return of form back into the abyss, but it's also the return of the new light, the dawn of hope, the light that will grow and incubate in the unconsciousness through the winter of not knowing to bloom again in spring. And so you know it's paired in a way with faith. And I've been teaching their shadow class, and people have been calling me or writing me about their experiences, and it's just this structure that has come up in my own life, and I see over and over again where we can come to a point where things are challenging and life is calling for a response. And we know we don't want to respond in a way we've ever responded before, because to do so is just going to produce the same result. And it's just viscerally painful to respond in the way we have in the past based on triggers and based on conditioning. And yet we have no idea how to respond. We know life's calling for something different, and it isn't clear to us. And there is we're almost like brought to our knees, like the turning point is rock bottom. But at that moment, this new light is born. And by really opening into the unconscious and letting go into the abyss and having faith and making ourselves available, some intimation or intuition can just start to form, and we feel its currents. And so for me, the turning point is like that birth of the new light and the faith that it gives to remain open and not to know, but to have confidence that something deeper, something new is coming. That's going to allow for what can't even really be conceived of, just intuited to know that there's a more wholesome way.
as we drift into this place, passing the season of the ancestors in many cultures, we find this this intersectionality taking place, that between metal and water, the cutting of the thread, potentially the Ouroboros, if you will, that constant return, the constant return, whereby in a Gnostic tradition one might release the tail of the serpent at that Ouroboros, at that intersectionality between the metal and the water, between the breath and the being, and in this intersection, we find ourselves in the place where our soul and its presence on this planet is the product of an ancestral current of blood, but also a celestial state of being, which is at this time of year, when the sun's so close to having just passed by the galactic center, which is that place of the source in many traditions, that place of where the source of heavens arise through the life gate, through the gate of destiny into this life, and that intersection of the metal and the water becomes the same as the water being the blood of our ancestry here in some sense, and that metal being that spaciousness of the heavenly component arising and combining together to provide the substrate of our existence here, that we can be fully liberated in this conscious awareness of being, and transforming that which is our blood and that which is our heavenly ancestry.
I like, Lonnie, what you spoke to about this sort of dual nature of the point, which is both a relinquishing or a surrendering to these depths or this dissolution, but also the place where the light returns from. And the light returns from that Shwen, that infinite opacity that we can't see into, and yet we are called to dissolve into or surrender into. And again, I'm really struck, and this is just as we're sitting here together, at how that really does speak to what this dialogue calls us to as well. And this is the most deeply restorative point, that when I've needled it on people who are, their essences are coming apart, like the two sides of the wheel are, it's no longer spinning, that eternal recurring has been broken in a certain way, and that this point will bring the life force back. It has literally done that. Like, I have literally inserted the needle in this point, and a person returns, as if, somehow miraculously that battery comes back again, not infinitely, but it has happened. And so when we speak to what we're going down into at that little turn at the malleolus, that little spin that there's a dipping down into. And I feel like that's also what we do when we're really in the dialogue, is dipping down into this place of incredible restoration that and it's not that any of us alone can do it. We can only do it almost in inviting together that mystery of the field, the mystery of Shwen, what life emerges from.
I think of that spiral, that curve, and if you think about the kidney meridian as the narrative of our actual destiny and our walk of life, and that little spiral that we go back to recover ourselves. And we have to go back and pick up those unfinished pieces, that those aspects of me that have been fragmented or lost or forgotten or neglected or whatever. And then going through these other stages where we turn back, we pick up the lost potentials, we see the mirror of our own illumined self before we get to the boost of yang to restore the current and come back to, oh, there I am. There I am. And that there I am that we're talking about is the unknown, which I think is the soul's resting place. It's the place where I actually can't fathom the mystery that I am. I think I stand on what I think I know as the definition of who I am. But it's always changing in its manifestation. And what's behind it, when I go deeper and deeper into the emptiness, into the unknown, into the darkness, into the origin, where that undifferentiated light of potential lives, it's pure mystery. I don't know who I am. And that's when I really know who I am.
Yeah, what occurs to me here is part of what's returning as well is all those structures that we stand on, all those historical, or might call it karmic patterns that sort of in a way symbolically stand behind us, sort of trying to shape this moment to look like the last moment. That part of what's returning is all of those structures have the opportunity to melt back into origin. And that's part of, as you were speaking, Lori, sort of where's that return of vitality occurs, because, the structures that we carry with us can be so heavy, so exhausting. And there's some kind of, possibility for liberation where those structures, they return to their own faceless face. And so then all of a sudden we have less burden because we've become more of who we are through this letting go, this deep letting go. We can't melt them by our own hand in a way. It's like we have to completely fall into what's occurring without the sort of extra will forces. And then all of a sudden, there's a liberation that couldn't have occurred otherwise, and those structures are liberated. And there's a sense of they become that flame, that sort of the luminosity that comes out of that emptiness.
Yeah, the alchemical text, the cultivational texts have the sentence, "A light appears in an empty room,"
Hmm.
which just, I think, for me, captures what you're saying. And I think that's beautiful, Alexandra, that the metal's letting go into the void of all of those structures, even identification with the ones that are necessary or wholesome. But the letting go of all the structures allows for the emergence and the liberation of a light, the rekindling of the light. And they're really, it's not a causal thing, it's a simultaneous emptiness and luminosity, just appearing simultaneously. And one of the things that strikes me about this time of year and the solstice is just the silence and the stillness. And I think that's one of the things that's beautiful in the holidays is there's not much to do outside. So everybody, in the cold places. And so we come together and there's a rebirth of sort of joy and warmth and sharing with friends. But, that's enacted socially. But I'm just aware in the stillness. I mean, I've had COVID the last week, so I've been literally alone in one room for a week. And and it's been snowing on and off, and there's just something very beautiful and pristine about the barrenness and the stillness, the quietness, and the sense of everything winding down, winding down, winding down. That does, I think, as Randine was saying, it reveals the soul and the soul. The soul is this emptiness, but it's also luminous. Glowing, and in that there's joy and there is hope and a deep sense of everything being just as it is. And that being enough, like for right now, everything being just as it is.
I'm going to sort of contradict a little bit here because speaking for myself personally, fear comes up with the darkness and the mystery and the change. There's fear and terror, and it calls for me personally to find, to listen out to the music of my heart. A little bit like a tango dancer listens to the music to know what the next step comes with the music. So I just wanted to bring the concept of fear and terror into this situation because I personally have in the circumstances to overcome fear and terror, to get to a still point, to get to a turn in the music, to be able to open my ears to listen to the song of my heart, which is very consoling, even if I don't know what the tune is or how I'm going to sing it. Curious to know what other people think about that.
Well, the Santi bringing up the notion of the ears, of course, is the external of the kidneys, and that ability to hear into the abyss, listen into the chaos, and it is a frightening thing, and it takes an amount of courage, and the way we know that it's destiny is because it is, as Lonnie was saying. And so being with that, gazing into the abyss, listening into the abyss, that fear is an alchemical distillating process of wisdom and the opening into the capacity to extract wisdom gained in this lifetime in a way that it is part and parcel of the Hun. And that aspect of the soul that carries that material forward. Is there, and the question happens every year, it happens every night. Is this the time? Is this the time for the release? Is this the time for the complete liberation? And yet at the same time, within the context of the chaos of that abyss, there is no time. It's beyond time. We drop into that place where there is only that.
Well, I think I have experienced what you're talking about in terms of fear and terror of ultimately letting go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we come, at least speaking for myself, my experience is that having done it over and over and over again in meditation and very, 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 12-hour sits without moving and 24 hours at a time, 3 hours on, 15 minutes off, and meditating since 1972, that there's a point where we can come to recognize that the terror is kind of an obfuscation that comes up on behalf of a very relative part of the self is experiencing that. And that which lies beyond it, that emptiness and stillness, which is inconceivable to the mind, is self, and is a dimension, that emptiness and the luminosity that is its other face are dimensions of the self that actually in time come to be more real and occupy more of my identification than all the other structures that I've let go of in order to come face to face with that dimension of the self. So as Alexandra was saying, everything that was let go of to eventually stand empty-handed in the face of this vast, infinite vastness beyond the mind and beyond knowing. That which lays beyond the fear after the fear is let go of and seen through becomes so much more compelling as a foundation of who I am than all these other relative kind of structures.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's sort of a awareness, having an awareness of all of that. Usually, if I feel that way, it's something that's just taken me completely by surprise, like birth trauma or something. And I think, oh my goodness, I thought we'd got past all this, and it creeps up, but I have to be able to recognize it, and then I can let it go. Because it comes in different contexts, in hidden ways, and I have to laugh at it. But when I can recognize it for what it is, it's easy to let go.
I think that's really very important what you're speaking to, Vasanti, because when we approach this domain, right, we're approaching origin, we're approaching, like you're speaking to, these most primal moments of emergence before order, like when you speak of just emerging from the birth canal. And see, what comes up for me, and it's interesting in this particular aspect of the conversation, is not so much a feeling of fear. And even thinking of my own emergence into the world, it's doubt. And, for when I think of this point, I think of like, okay, metal moving to water. So we're in the let go, everything's going down right now. Everything's going down to the root, down to the root, the sort of nubbing underneath gathering place. The life force is all going down. And in me, I've lived into, okay, the going down doesn't feel scary anymore. Like, I love the going down. I'm like, give me the going down, give me the rhizome, give me the root, give me the bulbs. I want to go down with the mushroom spores way down under there. But there's also this place in me where I'm like, yeah, but February 2nd, right? It's going to turn. And all that going down and gathering and nourishing those deep sacral primal genital places, it's going to come back up. Like, I have that belief. But then sometimes when I'll look around at the world and the outer world, or you might be with like I've been with and I'm like, oh my God, what if it doesn't? What if that what I believe is so fundamental, the turning point, the return. And then there's that moment. That's really there. I can get at the fear there. Like, it's not the going down. I'm like, give me that ride. but there's also, but what if it doesn't turn? Like, what if the return, like that dark goddess doesn't bring us through? That's an interesting place for me now. Your question sort of brought me to that. What if there's no arm? What if the infant emerges into this absolute chaos of the moment of the first breath, and there's no arm? The arms aren't there. The whole, the containment, that place where I can come back. That's an interesting meditation.
It is the contraction and the descension of fear, just that is the downward. There is going to be fear, and fear is the portal that we have to go through in any death. But I've never thought about the doubt piece, because the doubt, like, what is the energy of doubt? It's descending, but it's kind of backing up too. It's like this backing up in addition to the descending and downward movement. Like, what if not? What if chaos is all there is?
Right.
And I think that's like the opening of the mysterious pass, because there's something in the classics about concentrating the spirits on that opening where you just don't know. And so you think about like concentrating the spirits like on that place of doubt where maybe not. And maybe that's what it takes to actually surrender fully. Because I don't need to surrender fully if I know it's coming, right? Then it's mostly a surrender, but I know what's coming, so it's not fully. So it's like the doubt is like, that takes me down to nothing, nothing, nothing. And then to concentrate the spirits and hold that opening, that maybe there's not going to be a rebirth. Maybe there's not going to be a next. Maybe it's just black hole forever.
Well, Buddhists are totally into that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the goal of Theravada Buddhism fundamentally.
Nirvana.
Well, not even that. Just
Right?
I think we're getting somewhere.
Just
Getting
snuffed
somewhere.
out completely.
but
Like it's like, what if you put the needle in and there's nowhere it just keeps going, like the chi doesn't come, like the sap doesn't return.
Maybe
Okay, all right, okay.
I hate it when that happens.
Understood.
It's the same thing with every breath.
Right.
That breath goes completely out, and that holding into that space drops into that zone of the abyss. We can have that moment any time, at any moment, and but the stark terror of facing that as the final moment in an experience, that tearing at the fabric of reality. That there will be an end. Just as there was a beginning, there will be an end. And each season gets its beginning, middle, and end. And here we do it again and again and again. Is it even possible to conceive of it ending? How's it that it can begin if it doesn't end?
well, we live in a dualistic universe, and we're all divided. And I mean, this is a focus on one face of kidney 7, but kidney 7 isn't just the descent of breath and the return of everything into the abyss. It is literally the rebirth of the light. It is breath coming into water. Water is yin, its form. And it's the breath that animates. It's the simultaneous death and conception. Kidney 7 is conception in Taoist medicine. There is no death without conception. In the eyes of this point, it is simultaneous.
Mm.
It's not a question of what if. They're both happening at the same time.
Yeah.
You can't, it's like trying to talk about just let's contemplate yin. And we're not going to be able to do it. At some point, someone's going to have to go yang.
That's only in the context of being. When the dissolution takes place, when that unity field consciousness emerges, there's no yin, there's no yang.
It's beyond yin and yang.
Beyond yin and yang.
That's right, because we're dualistic, right? So when we talk about ultimacy and our experience of it, we have to create two. That's the first line in the Tao Te Ching.
Right. And we only get the privilege of experience when that dualism arises. So that dualism is that moment of the pivot that is under discussion here in the form of a point, which probably deserves ritual fire.
And this brings up for me when we're exploring the return, the return to what? And if we're returning to the seed, then we're in this question of, well, will I sprout? And what will I sprout into? But there's also that return where we fall off the wheel. into the wetness that is the whole thing and nothing. It's the timeless, the boundless, the out beyond the duality. But then there's a stepping back, like as soon as we step off the wheel and become the wetness, we realize the wetness is still arising as the wheel. And so then there's another kind of return. There's a return back into everything that is arising, but as the wetness. In which case, then all fear, doubt dissolves because there's only a self arising, self unfolding, self liberating. And so I was kind of hearing some of those. There's some of that sort of like whispering inside of what we've been exploring.
The wetness is luminous. Kidney fire.
Hmm.
It's not, emptiness has a luminosity, it has a light. It's the two faces that are simultaneous and I think this is the non-dual realization of, we need duality to speak about it, but it isn't just a wet, empty darkness.
Right.
It is filled with potential, but not just potential, an implicit inherent intention to manifest it. There's a spark, there's a something that even if 1 trillion eons go by,
Mhm.
that spark is going to ignite the dry gunpowder of potential. And so when we talk about maybe there won't be a rebirth, when I think of that and a fear arises around that, it's maybe I won't be reborn. But letting go of that, I have no faith that I will or won't be, and I have no idea if there's reincarnation makes perfect sense to me, and I've experienced some aspects of what the Tibetans talk about, both on entheogens and also in meditations, but I have absolutely no idea. But beyond whatever the outcome might be for me or my soul or anything that continues personally, there's a profound faith in the process,
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
in the impersonal. And I think that Chinese medicine, yes, it brings us into this world and understand, on the outside of it, brings us into this world and understand the dynamic flow of the elements and the movements of qi in existence, but it also brings us beyond that into this origin that I think Will pointed to in the beginning, and a profound relationship and a profound underlying rootedness and trust in that, very much beyond the personal. And
Exactly.
there's so much power in that. And that, I think, is what roots the power in all those upper kidney points.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I was sort of arising for me is like once there's an identification with the that is all that is arising, rather than will I re-exist? Once I'm the that is doing all of the existing, then there's no concern because it's just as brilliantly ineffable in cessation as it is in its expression through evolutionary sort of dynamism. But there's no need for a particular individual to reoccur. Because there's only one thing occurring. And once I'm that, once the sort of the broom has like swept away everything in the way of that, then even as obscurations return, they return as that, which is like a really different experience of terror or fear of death or grief or any of the things that we might feel, because now it's occurring as the one expressing itself, and it's a different kind of arising and self-animating, liberating burst.
Love this. uh, like to really trust in the impersonal, just as more than the personal. And that, talking about you have to have death for rebirth as two things, but to actually make the two into one, that death, rebirth, one thing, being, non-being, one thing, personal, impersonal, one thing, and like living so close to that chaos point that there's nothing to hold on to. And returning to that, which is a hard place to hold. Again, not to hold, but it is something that is a part of cultivation, that it can be held, experienced, that there's something that my mind can't grasp here, but I know it way more than I even know my mind.
Yes, the mind can grasp breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. But we can experience in the heart and look at it with the mind that actually all of existence in every moment is simultaneously arising and falling away at the same moment, at the same time. Like happening simultaneously, and it isn't, the breathe in, breathe out isn't happening in separate moments. It's happening simultaneously. Now, I was pondering a few days ago, just sort of the finitude of existence, and I was pondering that there'll be a time when no consciousness in the universe has any idea what the Beatles or Bob Dylan did, or Shakespeare. And I was thinking about that, and to my mind, it's like inconceivable and what a loss. But and then at the same time, you realize that this is the play of consciousness, and consciousness did it, and consciousness will go on in its play and in its creation. And I think the Bhagavad Gita and other texts talk to this like Leela, this play. And it's having a relationship to that everything right here, right now is dying. And everything right now is emerging from this, exploding out of this fountain. And so Kidney 7 draws the breath down into the abyss, but it also lays yang at the foundation simultaneously, rekindles it, all in the same moment.
I mean, I think it's also really feeling into the point as you speak to it, Lonnie, and think, being in the point, in the moment, that there's a certain kind of choice there, or at least my experience has been choice. And I love what you're saying about the simultaneous, that the choice, both are happening at the same time. The choice can be, no, I'm going to go back down into the abyss, or the choice is I'm rising out of it. But in a certain sense, because time doesn't really exist, both of those are happening at the same moment. And I'm really getting that as we speak to this question. I mean, I know for myself, one of the really potent meditations is that I am in this very moment already dead. And the incredible amazing presence that brings me to, as for whatever reason the breath continues to infuse this body, that in a certain sense, because time doesn't matter, is already in that place of death. But I love what we're coming to, and what Randy and you spoke to again, I think of it as not necessarily being in the chaos so much, but not denying it, like staying close to that place where it all comes apart. And as you called it, as you spoke to it, as a part of our cultivation, a necessary part of cultivation.
I guess if you're thinking about being dead, it's a very freeing place because we are no longer encumbered by all the Maya of our lives, and hence the potency of that thought or thoughtless thought, which water rises to its own level, and it speaks to me at that level of being unencumbered and finding oneself in a different way, because one rises to something. Obviously, using the shape of the vessel allows for it to rise to its potential.
Mm. Mm.
But I like the idea of being unencumbered and free through that thought of death in some ways. It allows for bliss to arise.
Yeah, that ultimate paradox that in that state of being dead to everything is my most alive. And that paradox of like Zhuangzi talking about, most men are like walking corpses, just recirculating the same all over again and again and again. That's a walking corpse. That's what most of us are doing. And we stop all that and we die to it all. And then we're really alive. So to contemplate the non-being, instead of walking around, who am I, who am I, who am I, like, who am I not is the more important question.
And there's a dimension of recognition that the part of us that's already dead, another way of saying it is a dimension of ourselves was never born.
Mm. Mm.
And that provides a sense of a pervasive, continuous stillness and emptiness and ground out of which I'm arising, but never separate from the part that is root.
And the more we touch into that, the more the manifest things seem dead, and that's the most alive. The unborn.
The unborn and the born, which never was. When you mention that, Randina, it reminds me of Gurdjieff, of course, talking about most men being as corpses walking the planet. It's this idea that we face our mortality is intrinsic to all the major traditions. This contemplation is a significant piece of it. And Lon, when you were talking about essentially the dissolution of Shakespeare and the Beatles, that that strikes a chord, right? Because really, all that we do, all that we conceive and create as a potential for being or a way of being in the world, um, comes to a place of of being thrown into the fire, given up, because there's a place that whereby it never was and it never mattered. And so in that simultaneity that you raise, we come to this place in this time of the year whereby we are given the opportunity to reflect upon those things that really don't matter. Those things that we choose or wish to make happen are dissolved into the depth of the fire, because there is an ultimate fire at the central alchemical fire by which at the bottom of the cycle, the ashes then return. And so that fu, the return, that hexagram is composed of earth and thunder, so that there is an explosion of self into this new world with all of its greater new possibilities, and hopefully absolved of the intention for some lasting presence in a field of Maya, which is ultimately in dissolution.
But you're speaking also, Will, there to the hexagram itself, which tells us that fire, that yang, it's almost like it's a special kind. It's a special kind that comes up from the deepest, as you're speaking to that deepest down below place. That is such, in a certain sense, we're talking about the most profound mystery here that we're calling on with this point. Where does the return emerge from? And to me, that is, even to go down to that place in ourselves, which I feel like we're actually approaching together, is such a sacrament.
I feel you as you're speaking. It feels like there's this invitation into that place of that recognition of the inevitability of an end. And similarly to what Randine was pointing to, and what it brings up for me is this incredible sense of immediacy, of the sacredness. It's like, don't fall asleep. Because you might not wake up. So like save that for nighttime, right? When you need to get some rest. But aside from that, don't fall asleep. And for me, uh, I feel I'm aware of my own mortality a lot. And it it sort of provokes two things. One is how precious it is to stay awake and to lean in to the life that's here. Give everything that can be given. And the other thing is the recognition that all of that, all of it is left behind. And so there's another relationship that has to be formed with what is it that I can take with me? What can I take with me through the gates of death? And the only thing I can take with me is my relationship to the faceless, formless one. And so there's sort of these two things, and as Lonnie is pointing to, they happen simultaneously. Simultaneously, don't fall asleep, give everything, because this is it. And don't fall asleep, because all you can take with you
Alexander,
is that formless. What's that?
you're reminding me of this meditation formula that was extensively used by the guards along the Great Wall, who are not allowed to fall asleep.
That's
and,
right.
and it has ma huang in it, but it has schizandra, wuetze
Yeah.
in it. And so um, I'm losing my power here, but and I have to switch rooms.
Don't fall
But,
asleep. No.
speaking of, but it also had cinnamon and peony, white peony, baishao, in it. So as this connecting of the taiyang down into the xiaoyin, the metal. As a metal, let's say, and
Well, I
bringing it
feel like
in,
I'm in a movie
the
in
formula does exactly
1967.
what we're talking about here.
There we go.
I am, you
Oh,
guys,
so great.
I'm still
Oh,
losing my power. You gotta find that
already
plug somewhere.
leaving the formula.
I know. Anyway, but that formula, I've been using it for 30 years, and it's remarkable. And it's not like doing ma huang tang, where you got enough ma huang to make you sweat, but it's enough ma huang to create a spark of consciousness at the level of that which is coming down and in. And it's doing it down through the Joy Yin, through the Baishao and the Peony, down into the Wu Weizi, the Schizandra, down, holding it down at the level of the kidney essence. Um, anyway, I
And
love that formula.
and
Oh,
cinnamon
I
and
love that
cinnamon,
description of that formula.
cinnamon twig is a great metaphor for the Great Wall too, right? Pushing out the
Yeah.
boundary.
Oh.
Anyway, I found my plug.
Mm.
I think it's also we
That
can
was so perfect, Will. I just want to take that clip.
Yeah.
It said everything.
it was like you were coming through the birth canal.
The birth canal.
And there were all these prisms like a 1960s Peter Sellers movie. It's so funny. And then you wound up back in the same room. So what changed? You just walked around the house with your.
Nothing changed, Lon. Nothing changed.
Well, I think we can consider too that hexagram 23 and 24 exist as a pair. And at 23, we have the 5 yin lines with the yang line on top. And this is the fall equinox. And this is the floating pulse. This is the house that has a roof but no foundation. This is death. This is letting go. And because when that last yang line goes, you just have 6 yin lines, and then you just have the abyss. But the solstice, the winter solstice, we take that top line, bring it back down to the bottom, and that's the rebirth. That's what Kidney 7's doing. It's bringing that yang back down to the bottom And the texts call it the pit of a peach.
Mm.
And you can eat the whole peach, but if you still have kidney 7 as the pit, that last young line is the pit, you can plant it and get a whole new orchard. And that's really, so when kidney 7 talks about return, it's really hexagram 23, which is the death and the letting go and the leaves falling off the trees and letting go of the whole joy of summer as everything dies. And kidney 7 is that it's the shortest day of the year, the solstice, the darkest day. But it's also that moment where the light is rekindled, which is that hope. And you know, from the ego's point of view, the ego can look at it as, oh, good, I get another chance. But I think from an absolute point of view, from the impersonal, as Alexander was saying, it's like, I don't need another chance because this is the only moment that ever is, and I'm going to give everything.
Hmm.
Yeah, so in a way, what we could say is that as in a clinical sense, like the great medicine that we're talking about here, what needs to be, I don't know the word, like heal doesn't feel like the right word, but the concern, the medicine is the resistance of the metal, the backing up on every level, culturally, personally, you know, in our patients, whatever we're looking at, it's the resistance to this that we're talking about, the resistance to the abyss, the let go, the surrender into it, which is really, you know, I feel like it's the great affliction that we're being called to somehow continue to address as practitioners right now in ourselves and in everyone we treat. Because there is a sense that we're facing a kind of dissolution, not just personally, but as a culture, as a planet. And so everything we're speaking to here is like what the opportunity is or what the medicine is for this time, not just of the year, but in a much larger sense.
Yeah, there is that feeling that civilization is approaching the same point in its cycle, and so therefore our many of the people we see are in a resonance with that, and with the zeitgeist of that stage, and that can be terrifying. And so, how do we hold the space for illumination and, uh, and a holding the safe space, allowing the earth component to really bank the water, give it some kind of shape that can be held, in order to reemerge with a sense of capacity.
And I mean, just staying with this as a kind of clinical sense, like I even feel like the fear, like what Vasanti you spoke to, once someone even knows that they're afraid or that there's even a sense of pulling back from, that is almost like I feel like you're already moving, because what I am aware of is a kind of gripping that even is an avoidance of the fear, even. So the gripping or the holding, thinking that that somehow is providing a solution. And because I think in such Gebserian terms, it's like when we approach these moments of leaping or movement, transformation, emergence, we are facing exactly what we're talking about, the abyss, the unknown. We don't know. And then there's a scurrying back, or it's almost like the wheel wants to turn backwards. I think that's the image I get. It's like, oh, we can't turn into this, so let's start trying to turn that wheel backwards, back into the metal or back into the water. So I actually like what you're saying about inviting the earth into the conversation.
Well, the Divine Mother has her place.
That's beautiful. Actually, I think that's really good. Yes. Yeah.
Teresa, my wife, was just talking about, coming across on the ferry yesterday, and person in our in our community here talking about how all of his friends are dying.
Huh.
And I mean, it is very real. What's taking place. The planet is in various stages of population collapse in different areas, and it is real. And so that earth component is how do we hold each other in this transition?
It's really beautiful, because I think in a way that's the other face, when we're looking into the depths and the abyss and the primal chaos out of which this light can spring, to remember the earth and that face of the divine and the yin, that we need that to call and on that as well. In our compassion in the treatment room, in our empathy in the treatment room, and for ourselves, that's
right, because metal and water are so cold. It is so disconnected at times, so happy to be disconnected, and but that may not be the most compassionate place to be living.
Well, and with this recognition that there is this collapse, we are dying, there is this coldness, and there is part of turning from that is medicating through very cold medicinals. That you look at the medications, the antidepressants, the narcotics, they're very cold medicines that dampen us, that put us asleep instead of stay awake through this dying. There is a return. And, those of us that have begun to trust that, to know that, can carry that, can be the ones that help others to stay awake through that dissolution and return.
Well, I think that's where this earth comes in. It's like I want a guide. If I'm going to walk through the gates of death, it would be much more preferable if someone kind of moves through those gates easily, and will hold my hand while I burn. And I think that we also do this with our clients in various ways. If we just the metaphor can kind of carry into all sorts of places where, our clients are going through some kind of a transition, some sort of a dying process, and they don't know what's on the other side. And we can be there with love and say, well, there is another side. I've seen many humans go through this very kind of death, and they made it, and you can make it too. And I certainly know that that's what I want on the very last day of my life. When it's that final death, it's like I'd like someone who can stand in two worlds and say, "Hey, brother, hold my hand. It's easy. Just let go."
This is true. And it's also a step that each of us has to take or not on our own.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's both
Right?
true.
I mean, there's an ultimacy to it. So, I mean, with patients and people we love and ourselves, ultimately we'll be standing in a place and there's a choice.
Lonnie, it's amazing because I hang in that place you're talking about a lot. The metal water place, the that facing the abyss full on. But in this very moment, Will, I feel like what you brought forward is shifting something for me around that. Almost like, when we come in and there's this incredible chaos, and yet the mother archetype is actually, I mean, not, we don't all meet that, but in some primal level of our being, that's as real as the other. And in this very moment, it's almost like a light bulb. Like I forget about the earth. I guess that's the simplest way to say it. It's not a very strong part of my constitution, but right now in this moment, I'm going, oh, wait a minute, that exists. That divine holding, mother energy is also there.
I think the earth is a very beautiful image of that receptivity and that mothering or whatever. As we look at gardens that come and go, they transform, they change. The hurricane comes, the prairie changes route, or even those eucalypt forests in Australia, which need fire to ignite their seeds or whatever. All that change is all sustained by the earth in such drama. And it's always been there, not in the same way, but it changes, but it's there. And it's okay. Something new will come out of it, new species. And obviously, I don't know if that's forever, but it has rekindled itself, right, through the ages. And for me, that's a very comforting thought, because there's no separation between us and that earth. We're all part of it. We're part of some kind of ecosystem. The landscape, the terrain of who I am is much larger than who I think I am.
As you're speaking, Vasanthi, and listening to what you're saying, Lori, it's like this whole time we've been talking about metal into water and metal into water, and it's like, well, what we're talking about is a transition. It's been Earth all along. It's like the place in between, the place that carries us through, and it's going doing,
Yeah,
You know,
that's so sweet.
there are so many worlds, and it's the world. And many of my teachers talk about the fact that in the next iteration on this planet, this world, there are fewer wombs for people to reincarnate through than there is now, and such that it is extremely vital that we really awaken fully as much as possible in this moment, because if one believes in reincarnation, the opportunity for that on this planet is reduced severely in the next iteration. And but the possibility, Vasanti, of the Earth actually being a world, and that there are many worlds and there are many possibilities for that level of incarnation in different places and spaces and dimensions. And so for me, it's a matter of becoming as fully realized, fully present as right, not falling asleep, Alexander. If I could just do that, that would be stunning. But it becomes another goal in the play, which is ultimately destined to dissolution. So I don't mean to be a nihilist here, but but there is some joy in the realization of absolute pure consciousness.
Which negates the idea of ultimate destination into dissolution.
True. Yeah.
I guess we all better go and needle ourselves in kidney 7 right about now.
Well, we have 5 minutes. Anybody have closing thoughts? Summing up? Anything else?
I just want to offer respect and appreciation for each of you. To be able to participate in this is just a privilege, and it is a joyful connecting at a level which is truly special, and I'm appreciating it.
We all feel that way.
Mm.
I start looking forward to the next one like tomorrow morning.
Okay, so we're going to leap over the abyss into our 3rd year. Amazing.
Oh, I love where this went and where it ended. Just that sweet and delicate beauty that brings it to a close. Just so precious. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all the listeners who've joined us, and we'll see you again in 2025.